appetite. So to Plato, virtue is the kind of almost an absence of temptation, where the temptations really don't tempt you in the same way. But even in society itself, how does Plato try and facilitate a virtuous society? That's the question. How does Plato try and facilitate a virtuous society? How does he construct the polis to facilitate a virtuous society?
And there's like the philosopher king at the top, and then there's the auxiliaries who are the glory part, and then the ones below that are the material ones. So like the gold, silver, and bronze souls.
So the auxiliaries, the guardians, how do they live?
With as little temptation possible.
Right. You always remember how he constructs a society versus how Aristotle constructs a society. Plato constructs a society, or the guardian part of the society, with as little temptation as possible, right? Even to the point of doing something probably none of us ever thought, which was to use orgies as a tool to remove sexual temptation, which is kind of an ironic thing. So how do we get people to not be sexually tempted? I know, orgies. That's how. That's how we'll do it. This doesn't seem like that's the most logical conclusion, but that's the way Plato does it. Now, Aristotle, how does Aristotle construct a society to create virtue or to facilitate virtue?
There's let's see. Is it like the rulers and the citizens and then the freemen and slaves?
Okay, so reason is going to be part of that, right? So there's going to be people who are more virtuous or less virtuous, but it's in both, it's going to be a little bit different there. Remember, when it comes to Aristotle, we talk a lot about the different constitutions. So what's the best constitution according to Aristotle?
The one that best suits like the situation?
Right, it's definitely going to be situational, but there is a best constitution.
It's like the mixed one. Where did I write it down? Like a mix between the oligarchy and the democracy.
Okay, it's going to be a balanced or mixed constitution, right? So that, because in that sense, the Constitution prevents one from dominating the other, so it kind of forces both classes, the upper class and the lower class, to be more virtuous, right? To be less, to not be able to dominate each other, but have to work together in cooperation. So therefore, it facilitates more virtue. But which class is best, according to Aristotle?
The citizens?
Well, they're all citizens. Because there is non-citizens in a polis, but they don't have any kind of role in the Constitution.
Is it like the middle class then?
The middle class. Why? Why is the middle class best, according to Aristotle?
They have like a vested interest. God, where's Elvis? Someone else talk.
Can you hear me?
No, a little bit.
You can or you can't?
Oh, it's a low volume for me.
Oh.
Yeah, it's low volume.
I don't know why. My
Let's
computer
see.
died.
Okay, you still sound very far away, Elvis.
I'll see what I can do. I don't know.
It's okay.
Or you just speak up.
Well, I don't have an answer to this question anyway.
Yeah. Oh, now I can hear you. Or speak closer to the mic. But yeah, as long as I can hear you, then you're fine.
Okay.
Is it because like the ones below the lower class has like a mob mentality and the upper class wants to oppress, so the middle class are sort of the moderate?
That's right. That's what we're looking for. Balanced, moderate, right? They're not wealthy, so they're not kind of in the position of being ambitious and wealthy and, oppressing the lower classes, or using the lower classes for their own wealth, or believing that wealth equals virtue. And they're not the lower class, so they're not jealous of the wealth of the upper class in the same way, and they're not believing that numbers or quantity equals virtue, majority rule. But they're the middle class. They are not too poor they're not so poor that they're going to be jealous, and they're not so rich that they're going to be ambitious and usury of the lower class like the rich are. So it's that balance, that moderation, that kind of facilitates this virtue and this justice. Without the dominant middle class, which really didn't exist anywhere in Greece at the time, then he says, okay, the best constitution is one that puts the middle class in charge, because they're the most virtuous, because they are the most moderate, the most balanced. But without that, then the next best constitution is one that puts that is a mixed constitution, a mix of oligarchy and democracy. And so the purpose of politics, to both Aristotle and Plato, is to pursue justice, a just city. And a just city is one that facilitates more virtuous citizens and not less virtuous citizens. So the purpose of politics is to pursue justice, justice being an equitable and moral distribution of goods and resources. And you pursue that by creating a society that facilitates a more virtuous citizenry. With Plato, that's by getting the balance right, by getting the bronze souls at the bottom, the guardians ruling, and then the philosophers and the philosopher kings ruling everybody, by getting the gold souls ruling the silver and bronze souls. And Aristotle, that's by trying to get the middle class to the balanced, more moderate middle class to be in charge. But if you can't, then to try and get a mixed constitution where the upper class and the lower class have to kind of play off of each other and work together to create a more just polis. Okay, what about Machiavelli?
Is it like the purpose of politics for him is to create your legacy? At least to the princes?
Yes. So right, the purpose of politics is, there is kind of a virtue to it as well. But the purpose of politics in Machiavelli is to purpose of politics in Machiavelli is to create order in a chaotic world governed by fortune. Create is to kind of remember, he thinks of it kind of artistically in that Renaissance version of creating order, of using skill, cleverness, skill, intelligence, ability, and willpower to creatively carve out order in a chaotic world that is governed by fortune. And if you can do that, then you're going to create that legacy. So, but the purpose of politics is really just establishing order, right? Is just conquering the chaos of the world. Remember, that's why it kind of sees virtue as manliness. What's manliness?
It's putting the state above everything. Well, I guess it's glory and
Right.
Adopting pagan
It's
virtues.
glory. Yeah, pagan virtues. Good. So, yeah, think of it this way. Remember we talked about, with Plato, reason is supposed to be above spirit. Well, to Machiavelli, reason and spirit, one shouldn't be above the other, but they both go hand in hand. Spirit is necessary, right? Spirit is the thing that gets you to kind of fight, that gets you to take it, that wants you to conquer the world through the force of your own will, to take out the monsters. So that's manliness. Like reason, the philosopher king is a joke to Aristotle. To Aristotle, the philosopher king is worthless, is useless. I mean, not to Aristotle, to Machiavelli. The philosopher king is worthless. It's the manly kind of, it's the spirited part that is clever. That isn't seeking truth and wisdom, but is seeking to actually accomplish or succeed or to just get things done, so to speak. Because that's what's necessary. In a chaotic world where fortune is constantly your adversary, you need to have the spirit of a Hercules, a spirit of the pagan manly men, so to speak, of the Spartans, to be willing to stare it in the face, challenge it, and conquer it. So the purpose of politics is to conquer and create order, and by order we mean the state, is to conquer and create large states, ordered states. And we do that by conquering a chaotic world.
And to
course,
maintain
a chaotic world,
to maintain it for as long as possible.
Yes. Exactly. That's exactly right. It's this. And of course, what's part of the chaotic world? What's one key element of this chaotic world that has to be conquered and kind of made subservient?
self-interest.
Okay, you're in the ballpark, but okay, self-interest. So who has self-interest?
Everybody?
People are part of the reason why the world's chaotic, right?
Yes.
So they also have to be conquered and governed. The purpose of politics is to create order in a chaotic world governed by fortune. Chaotic being, a chaotic world is chaotic in part because people. And that's what politics is supposed to do, and it does it by conquering, creating, and maintaining the state, or a state. Does that make sense? Any questions on that?
Yeah. Also, part of it is like keeping the spirits high of the citizens. Keep the highest spirits.
But why does he advise that the prince keep the spirits high of the citizens?
It's in his best interest to do so he can stay in power.
Right. Does he recommend this out of justice or benevolence or kind of reason?
No.
No.
Or does he recommend this out of clever manipulation?
Manipulate perception, yeah.
Yeah, it's manipulation. It's an exercise in power. So, yeah, keeping the spirits high of the citizens is not about caring about the citizens as citizens per se, but it is about manipulating the citizens. It's an exercise in power, exercising power over citizens in subtle and clever ways to keep their spirits high, to maintain the state, to maintain your rule, to maintain rule. You create order in a chaotic world by conquering people, manipulating people in order to maintain a prince's rule. That's because if you have one prince ruling, then you have more order. Remember what Machiavelli experienced in his lifetime. He experienced the Medicis getting overthrown, going to a kind of theocracy, the theocracy getting overthrown, going to a bureaucratic meritocracy, and then that getting overthrown and being brought back by the Medicis. So what does he want? He wants that stable rule of one family, one regime, one prince in power to create stability, to create order. And so that's the goal of politics, is to conquer, create, and maintain the rule of the prince so that there can be order and stability in the state.
One more thing. Just because it seems like he's kind of saying that every time I start to speak, I lose my thought. I don't know why, but basically it's in the citizens' best interest for the prince to act out of self-interest with simultaneous skill and competence. Like he's saying that if the prince is selfless, like he says, if the prince is selfish and virtuous, that'll lead to his own destruction, and all the people just want order. And so, like, giving them the bare minimum order is, as long as like they're satisfied and pacified, that's like the best that they could ask for because they're complacent.
Right, that's absolutely right. That this is better for everybody. Now, obviously, this is kind of a cynical conception of the world and a cynical conception of politics and human beings and society. But once you have that cynical conception, or this ontology where fortune's against you and the world is chaotic, then a self-interested bully of a prince who's clever and can maintain his rule, it creates some semblance of order. So it's better for the people too, because they're not going to do it themselves. They can't do it themselves because they do not have virtue, because human beings are not governed by virtue. Okay, good. Any other questions? That was good, Elvis. That really does help facilitate what we're talking about here.
Thank you.
Any other questions, or do you think we're pretty good on this?
I think I got this part.
Good. Nathaniel, you good?
Yeah.
That didn't sound convincing.
I'll be fine. Don't worry.
Okay. Well, I tell you what. Let's go on to number 3 because we've already been talking about it. So I think we can facilitate it real quick. And then this review session, we will have done all 3 of the prompts that cover all the philosophers. Now, what I'm thinking about doing is, now that we kind of know how this works, and I haven't received an email from the college saying that we're going to lockdown or anything else like that, thinking about holding another review session at the normal time, 6 o'clock tomorrow, now that I know I can facilitate it. Would that be something you guys would be interested in?
Yeah, is that like online, or do you mean it? Can we go to the college or no?
Yeah, I can't go to the college. It'd have to be
Okay.
this again. I tried,
Okay.
but they said they'd asked me not to bring you disease-ridden plague rodents into the college. So
So tomorrow at 6, right?
tomorrow at 6. Yeah.
Yeah, that works.
I'll
That
send
works.
out an announcement. Whoa, who is that?
Princess?
What?
It's Princess. Hi.
Oh, your mic sucks.
I'm sorry.
Oh, all right. Yeah, so I'm thinking, so yeah, if I will send out an announcement, so be checking your email, Elvis. So be checking your email, and I'll send out an announcement saying if I was able to set it up. And we'll do this again tomorrow at 6 for like an hour, hour and a half. And we'll go through the specific philosophers a little bit more, what you're worried about there. But why don't we go ahead and go through number 3 right now, and then we will have done the first 3 prompts, which are all the prompts that kind of ask you to compare and contrast multiple philosophers. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Yeah, I might not be able to come, so I think I'm just gonna like pay John to join the meeting and record it and be in my place. So I think you might hear John's voice tomorrow.
Fair enough, Elvis. Absolutely fair enough. All right, so real quick, Josue, this was question 2 on the study guide. So this is kind of the notes we made for question 2. So if you want to take a screenshot or something or write that down real quick. Before
No, yeah, I've been writing it. I've been writing it down for a while, so you're good.
Okay, awesome, cool. All right, so let's go to question 3. I'm actually not going to erase the board for question 3 because we've got a lot of it on there already. So we should be able to get through this relatively straightforward. What role does the concept of virtue play in each philosopher's conception of a just city and a good citizen? What explains their concept of virtue? What role does temptation and choice play in the relation to virtue? How are their understandings of what virtue is and its importance to the city similar to each other? How are they different? So this one is just all about virtue and comparing and contrasting. We've pretty much been talking about this the whole time. So this is going to be summary. But let's start with the Greeks, Plato and Aristotle. You tell me what's their different conceptions of virtue.
For Plato, it would be the most virtuous to have your soul ordered with reason on top.
Okay, good. Going back to that element. Reason governs, then spirit, then appetite. But there's more to it. What else is part of Plato's virtue?
It's
Come on,
virtuous
you
to
did
like
talk-
sorry, to seek out the truth.
Okay,
Not moderation,
that's-
but like yeah.
Yes, not moderation. So whenever you're thinking of Plato and Aristotle in terms of virtue, always think of them in terms of comparing and contrasting them to each other. Both of them believe that reason is the key to virtue in a way, but they differ in the sense of that Plato believes that it's not moderation, it's not resisting temptation that leads to virtue, because Plato doesn't believe that virtue is kind of pursuing all goods and pleasures in moderation. Aristotle believes that virtue is pursuing all goods and pleasures in moderation. That means to Aristotle, virtue isn't denying yourself any good and pleasure, and it is not pursuing any good or pleasure too much. It is always moderation. Whereas with Plato, Plato believes that virtue is denying yourself. Denying yourself and not to the point of not even being tempted and pursuing one good or pleasure, truth and wisdom, above all else. So, in that sense, Plato is very kind of extreme in his conception of virtue, and Aristotle believes that virtue is the avoidance of extremes.
So would it be like, to Plato, the philosopher king is the only actual virtuous person, and that's why the warriors and everyone below him needs like all these systematic ways to stop sin or whatever?
Yes, absolutely. That is absolutely right. Remember, to Plato, we're trying to create a virtuous city. And so in order to create a virtuous city, we need the philosopher king, or the reason element, at the top. And then the auxiliaries, secondary, and then the appetitive, or the merchants and tradesmen and the peasants at the bottom. And so it's just like in any person can be virtuous if they are governed by reason first and foremost, and then the spirit is a servant to reason, and the appetitive is a slave to reason. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Governed, servant, slave. Well, the same in the city. The city isn't about making sure that we facilitate virtue in as many people as possible and that those people kind of govern. It's about making sure that you identify the most virtuous people in the city, the philosophers, and have them rule. Whereas in Aristotle, it's about resisting temptation and about trying to facilitate as much virtue among the populace as possible, and then making sure that the virtuous are the ones that have the best chance of governing. What about the Christians? Well, hold on. Let me make sure I got all of this question here. So remember, what role does temptation and choice play? In Plato, temptation and choice is we try and remove temptation and choice in order to facilitate virtue. In Aristotle, we try and expose, or essentially temptation and choice are tools so that people can practice and demonstrate virtue, and so that we can identify the virtuous among us. According to Aristotle, how can we identify the virtuous among us if we do not allow for temptation and choice, so we can see who can successfully resist temptation and who cannot? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Christians. What about the Christians? What's their conception of virtue?
To Augustine, virtue is being a member of the city of God.
And how are you a member of the city of God?
By putting God's love, or putting your selfish love towards God.
Right. Is that the only way you can be virtuous in Augustine's philosophy?
Yes.
You say it so hesitantly, but you're right. Yes. because can politics, society, or even your own efforts make you virtuous, according to Augustine?
No.
No.
That's the only thing that can make you virtuous.
The love of God.
Right. God. God's the only thing that can make you virtuous. So you have to love God, and then because you love God, you want to please Him above all others. So that's the love. The love is that you want to please. You selfishly, remember, according to Augustine, virtue is when you selfishly want to please God above all others. But then because of that, in order to please God, you have to love others, because that's the best way to please God. So in order to please God, you have to love other people. So in order to love God selfishly, you have to love other people selflessly. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He also says that
Right.
anyone who sins is sin's slave. And he's talking
Yes.
he's talking about like we all want peace. Peace equals joy, but it's better to be a slave to man than a slave of lust, like.
And he knows what he talks about there. Right. So if you love yourself, then you are, according to Augustine, if you love yourself more than you love God, because remember, there's only two options. You either love God more than yourself or yourself more than God. That's it. So if you love yourself more than God, you're going to be a slave to sin, because the appetite will rule. That's a way that Augustine is, similar in comparison to Plato and the Greeks, is that if you love yourself, the appetite will rule. If you love God, then the appetite doesn't rule. If you love yourself, then you are a slave to your appetite. Then you're not in moderation. You're not. But if you love God, you're not a slave to your own pleasures, but you actually can think clearly. Now, not necessarily through reason, but through love. You can think clearly because you love God, who's the only one who can think non-selfishly. So therefore, now you will be able to kind of treat other people without the same selfishness because of that. But if you love yourself more than God, then there is no virtue. You are going to be a slave to your appetites.
Peace of the body and soul is the duly ordered life and health of a living creature. Peace between mortal man and God is an ordered obedience in faith and subjugation to the everlasting law.
Right. So similar to Plato, virtue is being a slave to the right thing. With Plato, virtue was being a slave to truth and reason, like being a lover of truth and reason. Augustine, virtue is being a slave or a lover to God, which is truth, reason, love, grace, true peace, all the virtues. So the only virtuous being is God. Therefore, you can only gain virtue by loving the only virtuous thing or being. So how does choice and temptation play into this?
You make the choice to resist temporal temptations and go with your love of God because you put the eternal above the temporal.
Okay, so good. I think I would clarify that in one way. You wouldn't focus on resisting the earthly temptations as much as you would make the choice to love God, and then that would be really, would you be as tempted by the earthly things once your love and devotion is directed towards God?
No.
No.
Right. But if you love yourself, are you going to be able to resist those temptations much at all?
Not really at all.
No, so it's kind of more platonic in that sense, right? Where if you love the right thing, then temptation won't really be an issue and you don't have to resist it. Whereas if you love the wrong thing, then you're going to, then at least with some key temptations, you're never really going to be able to resist it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. What about Aquinas? Aquinas is going to be different. What is virtue according to Aquinas?
Virtue is justice that can only be achieved by human laws that implement natural law.
Good. Now let's talk about it this way. Who would be a more virtuous human or person, and who would be a less virtuous person? According to Aquinas.
To Aquinas, the more virtuous person is someone who uses their reason to decide if that law is following natural law.
Okay, you're on the right track. So, to Aquinas, the more virtuous person is one that uses their reason and is able to use their reason to understand natural law and follow natural law. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. If the person has reason, but doesn't use it to understand and follow natural law, are they virtuous?
No.
No. So that's the key distinction. Similar to the Greeks, Aquinas believes that virtue is grounded in reason, unlike Augustine, who believes it's grounded in love. Similar to the Greeks, he believes it's grounded in reason. And he believes that you have to use that reason in the right way, which is to understand, apply, and follow natural law. That's going to be more virtuous. The less virtuous are either going to not have the ability, are not going to have as much reason to be, so they can't understand natural law in the same way, or they're not going to use their reason to understand natural law, so therefore they're not going to apply and follow natural law in the same way. That will make them less virtuous. So virtue is understanding, applying, and following natural law. Or a little bit more fuller sentence there. Virtue is using your reason to understand, apply, and follow natural law. How does choice and temptation come into play here?
People have free will.
Okay, good. People do have free will, and how should or shouldn't they use it?
Justice has its roots in nature, and you should use your free will to act in accordance with justice, which we have in us, but sometimes don't follow. So I guess it's just to seek it out.
Okay, you were pretty close. So we have free will, or choice and temptation comes in the sense of, do we always choose to apply and follow natural law or the law of justice?
We don't.
That was a question. Okay. No, we do not. Right. So are we frequently tempted with our, oops, it's not up here anymore, with our sin nature to, even if we know, even if our reason can grasp natural law, the law of justice, God's law, are we tempted to put into place laws or, either not follow natural law or put into place laws that violate natural law?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the temptation. So now that we understand natural law, at least in its basic elements, then we must choose to follow natural law and to apply and follow natural law, both in the rules we make for our own life and in the positive laws we use to govern society.
And it has to be promulgated.
Yes, of course. But so now that we know that a reason can understand natural law, God's law, the law of justice, then we now must choose to apply natural law and follow it, both in our own life, in the rules we give for our own life, and in the laws, the positive laws or the human laws that we create to govern society. And yes, of course, they have to be promulgated. So there is an element of choice and temptation. And that goes into Aquinas' conception of virtue. Good. Any questions? Confusions? Issues of any sort?
I think I'm good. Ish.
Elvis?
No, I'm not totally clear, but I can't really come up with what kind of question to ask, but so.
Okay, why don't you think about it, and then tomorrow we'll start and see with your question. Oh, you're not going to be there, damn it.
Well, I mean, it's all right.
Why don't you think about it?
I'll write it down if I come
The
up with
conference is about to end.
Because apparently the conference is about to end. So, Nathaniel, are you okay? Were those words?
No, there might be words tomorrow. How about that?
Okay, sounds like a plan. There might be words. Josue?
I'm good so far.
Okay, good. So as I said, I'm gonna try and set one up for tomorrow night, 6 o'clock for an hour and a half. I will send out a message with the link like you got today once I can do that. If they send out an email tomorrow morning, tonight or tomorrow morning, saying that the world is full of scared little bunny rabbit bitches that can't handle the virus, and we're going to shut down the entire thing, then we'll deal with that as we can. So I'm going to go. I have a headset and mic from home. I don't have a video camera, so we'll just I'll figure it out. But unless that email comes out, I'm going to try and set it up for tomorrow at 6. Okay?
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Bunny rabbit bitch.
All right. See you later. Don't quote me on that.
See you later.
See you later.
Bye. How do I stop this thing?